Hello, and thank you for coming to this exploration of making friends with procrastination. I'm Joanne Lehman, a creative writer and a lifelong procrastinator. I just finished my final semester in Spalding's MFA program in creative nonfiction, and I'm graduating at the end of this residency. Procrastination has been my companion throughout my work on my MFA. And indeed, it was there at my side, or should I say deep in my psyche, for decades before I ever applied. I think I'm old enough now to say with certainty that I will always be a procrastinator. But I've been coming to terms with that reality and even embracing it. And even though I struggle, my procrastination is not stopping me from being a writer or even from being a good one. I'll venture to say that procrastination has not stopped and is not stopping anyone else at this talk from being a writer either. And I think it's safe to assume that writers is what we all want to be. If you're attending this session, chances are pretty good that you're a Spalding student or a Spalding grad, maybe a Spalding faculty member. And if that's the case, you have accomplished something pretty amazing with your writing already. That's true even if this is your first residency and you're embarking on your first semester in the program, even if you haven't published anything yet. You managed to put your application together. You have written enough and well enough to have been admitted to this program. And those who admitted you believe you can succeed. You should believe it too. I'd like to speak for a moment to the avowed non-procrastinators in the room. I see you. I know you exist. I know that we bewilder you at best. Some of us may frustrate or exasperate you. I even have some sense of the distress you might experience if colleagues, good friends, or family members procrastinate in ways that affect you negatively. And I'm not here to tell you or your procrastinating others that procrastination is an unmitigated good or that it never causes problems or that you just have to suck it up and put up with anything and everything the procrastinator in your life does or doesn't do, as the case may be. If your life or your work or your relationship is made miserable or non-functional because of someone's procrastination, no matter whose, of course, there's a serious problem that needs help. But also, that's beyond my scope here. If you're just puzzled or even annoyed by someone's approach to their writing or related work, but it's not actually harming you or them, I ask you to bear with them and with me. Try to accept that we are different from you. Try to withhold judgment and extend some grace and maybe some space to us as we figure out how to make the most of our style of working. It's not hard to find books, articles, TED Talks, Skillshare and Udemy classes, self-help gurus, and even research psychologists who address procrastination. Interestingly, a lot of them use negative and even violent language and imagery. Crush, conquer, defeat, overcome, or at least get rid of your procrastination forever. Graham Nichols' Udemy course has a recurring slide of a man with an enormous sledgehammer smashing a concrete wall. Procrastination breakthrough, says the headline, while ominous music plays in the background. But even those who use gentler language have some pretty dire things to say about what they seem to view as an affliction. For instance, Piers Steel, in his self-help guide called The Procrastination Equation, How to Stop Putting Things Off and Start Getting Stuff Done. Procrastination, he says, causes us grief at work, at school, and in our private lives, particularly in relation to health. Steel also claims that writers are among the worst procrastinators, and he gives us examples Tom Wolfe and Samuel Coleridge. Just to be clear, Piers Steel is not just a self-help guru. He's a PhD research psychologist. One of his seminal works is titled The Nature of Procrastination, a meta-analytic and theoretical review of quintessential self-regulatory failure. That was in Psychological Bulletin in 2007. Quintessential self-regulatory failure? Is that how he would describe me? Ouch. Dr. Steele's own research resume is impressive and respectable. He has apparently done zillions of studies, and he cites zillions more by his colleagues. Even so, I take issue with some of his well-researched claims, For instance, that contrary to popular opinion and self-appraisal, procrastinators are not perfectionists. It is commonly thought, he says, that we delay because we are perfectionists, anxious about living up to sky-high standards. This perfectionist theory of procrastination sounds good and even feels good. But, he goes on, the theory doesn't pan out. He points to mountains of studies in support of his claim. In fact, he says, it's actually the best researched topic in the entire procrastination field. Perfectionism produces a negligible amount of procrastination. But I have to wonder how those studies defined and measured what they called perfectionism. Steele cites another psychologist, Robert Slaney. Perfectionists were less likely to procrastinate than non-perfectionists, a result that contradicted the anecdotal literature. My own research backs him up, Steele proclaims. Neat, orderly, and efficient perfectionists don't tend to dilly-dally. Seriously, Dr. Steele, you're defining perfectionism as being neat, orderly, and efficient? Sure, maybe college students with tidy desks don't turn their papers in late. His research seems to be focused on college students, by the way. But what about those of us whose perfectionism doesn't manifest in alphabetizing our bookshelves, but in struggling to cough up a rough draft because we're terrified our first sentences won't meet an impossible standard of published perfection? I think Steele's claim is based on a flaw in his study design. And he and his buddies are so quick to knock the anecdotal literature. We creative nonfiction writers are all about the anecdotal literature. Another PhD psychologist who writes for the self-help market, Timothy Pitchell, echoes Steele's notions about self-regulation failures. There are many types of self-regulation problems, he writes in his popular book, Solving the Procrastination Puzzle, including problem gambling, overeating, reckless spending, and drinking too much. Procrastination is best understood as a problem like these. Why do we fail to self-regulate? The most important thing to understand is that we give in to feel good. When we give in to feel good, we give in to impulsive urges, all in an effort to avoid negative emotions. So chronic procrastinators are running away from negative feelings by putting off their tasks. Okay, some of this resonates with me. It doesn't feel good to me to stare at a blank screen, wondering if I even have something to say and dreading the struggle of forming thoughts and sentences, especially if I'm a perfectionist with unrealistic expectations for how those thoughts will sound at first. But is the answer really to suck it up, as Pitchell suggests? Stay put, he advises, as the crucial first step. To be fair, Pitchell goes on to qualify his advice. We do not simply have to take a tough guy approach and suck it up to succeed. There is another, gentler approach. If we choose to acknowledge our fear, but find the courage to be in spite of this fear, we may more successfully stay put and stay on task. We will not give in to feel good. We will have made the first step toward beating procrastination. Okay, I might have to give Dr. Pitchell a chance. This all makes some sense. But as a CNF writer who loves the anecdotal literature and seeks more poetically phrased wisdom, I'm more drawn to what some philosophers and other creative writers have to say. The poet David Whyte, for instance, suggests that procrastination is not always what it seems. To see procrastination as undesirable, especially in the initial stages of an endeavor, is to say that Jacob was procrastinating by wrestling with his angel. That a woman feeling her first birth pangs should simply get on with it. That a bud should be broken open to reveal the full glory of the flower. What looks from the outside like our delay, our lack of commitment, even our laziness, may have more to do with a slow, necessary ripening through time and the central struggle with the realities of any endeavor to which we have set our minds. Now, this is music to my struggling soul. This speaks to my condition as a procrastinating writer. For almost everything I write, there is a slow, necessary ripening through time. There is a struggle with the realities of the endeavor, for sure. Some of that ripening may even have to come before I can produce a first draft, no matter how shitty, to quote the writer Anne Lamott. Certainly, some of it comes during long seasons of revision when it might look like I'm not working on the piece of writing at all. That ripening happens partly under the surface, while I'm away from my notebook or computer, as I take long walks, as I wash dishes, maybe even sometimes as I play a few levels of Toon Blast on my iPad. Quintessential self-regulatory failure? I don't think so. I'm ripening and struggling with the realities of my endeavor. I'm also encouraged by a New York Times opinion piece written by Spalding's own Silas House some years back. The art of being still is not about procrastination per se, but it does affirm that writing doesn't always look like sitting at a tidy desk, clocking the hours, doggedly churning out text. House tells of having had trouble in the past with questions about how many hours a day he wrote. Sometimes I write for 20 minutes, he says. Other times I don't stop writing for 6 hours, falling over at the end like an emotional, wrung out mess, simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated. Sometimes I go for months without putting a word on the page. Can you relate to that? I certainly can. But he finally came to a realization about the right answer to that question. I write every waking minute, he reports. I mean, of course, that I am always writing in my head. I'm sure many of us can take heart. Staying in the philosophical spirit for just a bit longer, I want to quote the truly beautiful perspective of a friend of mine, writer and children's librarian Else Kushner, who is no slacker and is in fact the author of a published children's book. This might sound a little grandiose, Else wrote to me in email, but when I think about it, the question of procrastination is really one about the meaning of life, because procrastinating is putting off what you should be doing. And if what you should be doing is savoring the moment and having a meaningful existence and connecting with others and putting your creative soul into the world, then just about everything else falls under the umbrella of procrastination in some way. Of course, when there's a time-sensitive thing to be done, then anything that's not that thing feels like procrastination. But often it's in those time-stolen interstices that the creativity squeezes out, yet another crack where the light gets in. I'll be savoring Elsa's wisdom for the rest of my life. I hope she turns that pearl into a whole essay or book and publishes it. So what do we do though? How can we actually finish some pieces of writing, meet our packet deadlines, finish our MFAs, or perhaps in the best of all writers' worlds, meet publication deadlines? No matter how deeply beautiful and meaningful our procrastination is, we have to figure out how to move toward our goals, don't we? So let's consider some strategies and practical tips. First, there's a mindset shift that has to happen. Shame has no place here. If we're going to banish or conquer something, let it be shame. Even the PhDs of quintessential self-regulatory failure don't advocate shame and self-flagellation. Dr. Pitchell, for instance, urges self-forgiveness and self-compassion, letting go of how you might have failed in the past, focusing on what to do next. Another writer, Alexander Chi, speaks about this need for self-forgiveness. For instance, when you haven't written anything in a long time and you feel humiliated about that fact. This is when it's time to forgive yourself, he says, and then to get back to writing. And yes, I learned this the hard way. It's hard enough to have a problem without also being ashamed of the problem. Call a friend, take a walk, cry, whatever it is you need to do. I can't stress this enough, the importance of self-forgiveness and self-compassion if you are someone who struggles with procrastination about writing. I think it's a far more effective approach than taking a metaphorical sledgehammer to a concrete wall or conquering an enemy. If you can't see your way clear to being compassionate or forgiving of yourself, that in itself is worth some work. And I suggest reading one of the very good books on the topic, such as Self-Compassion by Kristin Neff, or working specifically on this with a good therapist, or both. On then to some practical tips. My own list does not start with the popular put butt in chair admonition, or even Anne Lamott's encouragement to write shitty first drafts. Valuable as those pieces of advice may be, I don't like the ring of them for myself. Sometimes my way forward is to get my butt out of the chair for a while, for instance, for a long walk. And when I'm struggling with procrastination, I'm overwhelmed by the prospect of an entire draft, shitty or not. Anne Lamott's other famous phrase, which is also the title of her book on writing, Bird by Bird, works better for me. I paraphrase it as bit by bit. Famous writer Isaac Dinesen, also known as Karen Blixen, put it this way: when you have a great and difficult task, something perhaps almost impossible, if you only work a little at a time, every day a little, suddenly the work will finish itself. I copy that quotation into almost every journal and planner I use. It has helped me avoid despair many times. I adjust it according to my circumstances. Sometimes instead of every day a little, I might tell myself every week a little, or every so often a little. Or as deadlines get closer, it might become every hour a little, or even every few minutes a little. It can be fatally daunting sometimes to picture the whole project, the whole essay, the whole graduation lecture. But I can probably chip away at something just a little, maybe for 5 minutes, or just 1 or 2. And then after some interval, another 5 minutes. Maybe the project will jumpstart into roaring life in the process. Or maybe I'll finish the whole thing in tiny chunks. I'm a professional editor. One way to put that is that I make a living trying to clarify other people's writing. I've done all sorts of editorial work, from proofreading to deep substantive editing. And I can tell you that it's not always fun. It can be torturous or just tedious, but in any case, the urge to put it off can be real. Years ago, I had a freelance project of editing the transcript of a mock trial about medical malpractice. The story was interesting enough, but the pages and pages of dialogue in the courtroom became deadly dull. It was mind-numbing, although not mindless. I had to pay attention enough to make sure punctuation was appropriate, spelling was correct, and the words fit the context and hadn't been misinterpreted by the transcriptionist. It was at least 50 pages long. I already had a full-time job, and I did not want to work on this project, but I had committed to it and was going to be paid. I hit upon the perfect little bit at a time approach. I kept the manuscript along with my blue pencil. This was long before on-screen editing, in my bathroom, in my basket of reading materials. I decided every time I sat on the toilet, I had to pick up the pages and the pencil and edit at least a few lines, a little, as it were. Then I could put it down and leave until the next time I used the bathroom, when I'd do the next few lines or pages. No doubt it helped that I lived alone at the time and didn't have to share a bathroom. I could go in there 30 times a day and stay as long as I wanted, and I did, but I never felt trapped. Sometimes 5 minutes turned into 10 or more at a time. I finished the job, added up all my little chunks of time, and got paid. Other writers have also recommended that bit-by-bit approach. Leslie Lynch, who graduated in CNF back in 2017 and had a bunch of novels under her belt before she even started her MFA, told me recently that her techniques for getting over the hump with procrastination include these. 1, doing one thing, not the whole thing, but the first step. 2, doing the task for 5 or 15 minutes. My friend Else Kushner also takes this approach, but gently. When I find myself falling into self-scolding about my terrible procrastinatory ways, she wrote to me, I've been trying to pause and notice it and gently ask myself, is it okay for me to do what I'm doing for a little while? Am I doing what I really want to be doing? If not, is there one small thing I can do towards what I want to be doing? Often that's enough to get me to take that one step. That one step can lead to another, and a project can pick up steam. I have also managed on occasion to trick myself into finishing a project by finding a way to take myself off the hook, take the pressure off, put myself in a position where I believe I don't have to do the thing after all. Many decades ago, in my freshman English class in college, there was an end of semester paper due. My topic was Hemingway's writing style, as I recall. We had to turn in a partial draft earlier in the semester, and it was graded, and then we had to meet individually with the professor before turning in a final version. I got a B on my partial draft, which I felt okay about, but I didn't feel confident about how to continue. Then the professor gave us an out. I think he was overwhelmed with grading himself. He told us that we could choose to go with the grade we got on the partial draft and not submit another one. Or we were free to submit the final one to be graded and take the higher of the two grades. Since I felt overwhelmed because I was unsure about my next steps, I decided to take him up on the offer. I went to his office and told him I was going to settle for the B and be done with the paper. He said okay, but in a wistful sort of way, and he sighed. I imagined he was a little disappointed. It was finals week, and I had another exam in a few days, but not much else on my plate. I went back to my dorm room and decided that, by God, I was going to finish that English paper after all and surprise my professor. At least I'd work on it in the time I had. My professor wasn't expecting it, so if it didn't work out, he'd never know. It worked out. With the pressure off, I enjoyed finishing that paper, feeling all the while like I was keeping a secret and not really risking anything. When I turned it in, I included a note explaining what I'd done. I got an A, but that wasn't really the point. I had stumbled upon a way to move myself forward on a project that scared me. I like to call that general approach going at the writing sideways, as opposed to staring into it head on and getting frozen in terror. The point is to take the pressure off, and it's effective when what's holding me back is essentially performance anxiety. There are other ways to do it, including doing task-adjacent tasks, like organizing all the materials you need for a project, but telling yourself, I'm not really trying to draft that essay right now. I'm just hanging around near it. And then maybe some ideas start to sidle in under the radar, and you find yourself tossing an opening sentence onto the screen, but you didn't have to, not right then, so you're ahead. Even Dr. Pitchell, bless him, alludes to something like this, suggesting that we ask ourselves about a project we're reluctant to move ahead on. If I were going to do this, even though I'm not, what step might I take next? And then we might just find ourselves moving ahead with the thing, almost in a sort of gleeful rebellion because we gave ourselves that space. I think such strategies, by the way, can be ways of showing ourselves compassion. I much prefer them to punitive approaches like, if I don't do X, I'm not allowed to do Y. I want to share my favorite approach of all time to procrastination. This is not original. I first heard about it from a friend who was also my boss many years ago. She told me how she never could get around to cleaning her house until she signed up for a math class at the local community college, and she discovered she'd much rather clean than do math homework. My house had never been so clean, she said. I loved that idea, and I've treasured it ever since. I call it hierarchies of reluctance. It's pretty simple. For every important task you're reluctant to work on, find another task you think you should work on, but which you're even more reluctant to do. Work on the first task as a way of putting off the other. Then, if that other really is important and urgent, just find something else to put off by doing that one, and so on. It turns out that this approach, which is highly entertaining to talk about at parties, by the way, wasn't original with my boss either. Or maybe it was, but it's one of those ideas that emerged spontaneously in many places and through many different people. Last year, I came across a whole book about it by philosophy professor John Perry called The Art of Procrastination, a Guide to Effective Dawdling, Lollygagging, and Postponing, or Getting Things Done by Putting Them Off. It's a tiny book based on an even tinier essay that Perry published, not entirely in jest, in the Chronicle of Higher Education. Perry admits that his approach, which he calls structured procrastination, didn't originate with him either, even though he discovered it for himself. He notes that something like it was referred to by the Chicago Tribune columnist Robert Benchley in 1930. The procrastinator, writes Professor Perry, can be motivated to do difficult, timely, and important tasks, as long as these tasks are a way of not doing something more important. Structured procrastination means shaping the structure of the tasks one has to do in a way that exploits this fact. As just one example, he mentions the task that was at the top of his to-do list while he was writing this little book. It was to finish an essay for a volume on the philosophy of language. It was supposed to have been done 11 months ago, he says. I have accomplished an enormous number of important things as a way of not working on it. The trick was that finishing that essay really wasn't the most important thing to be done at the time. It just felt that way. When Perry apologized to the volume editor for his delay, it turned out, he says, that I really wasn't much farther behind schedule than anyone else. Perry has more to say about how structured procrastination works. For instance, he doesn't put things off in ways that will harm other people. Also, working out the shifting balance of things can be tricky and requires a certain amount of self-deception. One could also argue that his little book is at least a bit tongue-in-cheek. The thing is, there's truth in it too, and the principle has been tested out by many readers, including me. Last year, I faced both a tax paperwork deadline and an MFA packet deadline in close proximity to each other. I had plenty of reasons to feel reluctant to complete both of those projects, yet I was able to play them off against each other and get both done. I put off the taxes in order to get the packet in on time, and then got the tax paperwork to my accountant by her deadline by putting off for a while starting my work on the next packet. It's genius. Just to illustrate how universal this concept is, I have a cartoon by Nathan Pyle. You may know Pyle's art from Facebook or elsewhere on the internet. His panels feature aliens living typical human lives, presumably in some middle-class home in the US, but they describe everything with a language different from what's familiar to us. A pet, for example, is a creature, and children are offspring. To kiss is to mouth push, and to vacuum the carpet is to roll suck the foot fabric. The procrastination cartoon, of course, never uses the term procrastination. A parental figure is shown checking in with an offspring. Did you complete the formal education assignment? No, answers the offspring, gesturing around at what we would call its bedroom. But I organized my chamber. Parental figure continues, you used one responsibility to evade another. Yes, admits the offspring. Parental figure then delivers the moral. This will be a crucial productivity strategy for the rest of your existence. What am I really saying in the end? I'm not arguing that procrastination is unequivocally wonderful, or that anyone who doesn't struggle with it already should take it up. I'm certainly not saying there aren't things worth doing, goals worth achieving. Actually, I believe the opposite. I am suggesting, though, that procrastination isn't unremitting evil either. We don't have to view it as a beastly enemy to be crushed and violently overthrown. Those of us who know we live with procrastinating tendencies deep in our psyches should not treat ourselves as an enemy. We should certainly not try to beat or shame those tendencies out of ourselves. Perhaps we could think of our procrastination as a quirky and sometimes counterproductive friend, but a friend nonetheless, or at least a dance partner. For us, getting things done, especially such important things as the writing we are called to do, might be an intricate dance, one that takes special skill, negotiation, and grace, but it can be danced. Thank you.